Hey guys, Bison25 here, watching the launch of Cygnus aboard an Antares from Wallops Flight Facility.
Good day. You are looking live at Launch Pad 0A at the Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport in Wallops Island, Virginia.
Well, this is actually holding up pretty well.
Where, for the second day in a row, an orbital ATK Antares rocket stands fully fueled, ready to lift off about 29 minutes from now on a resupply run to the International Space Station. On this commercial resupply mission for orbital ATK to deliver almost 7,400 pounds of supplies and scientific experiments for the Expedition 53 crew on board the orbital outpost. At this hour, the International Space Station, which is the destination for the Cygnus resupply craft dubbed the SS Gene Cernan, is flying 251 statute miles over the southern Indian Ocean. At the time of launch, about 28.5 minutes from now, the space station will be over the western Pacific, flying just to the northeast of New Guinea. At the Range Control Center at the Wallops Flight Facility, the orbital ATK team of launch officials and engineers carefully monitoring all of their systems. The launch director, Kurt Eberly, just conducted a poll of all of his positions. Everyone is go for launch, as they are at the orbital ATK flight control room in Dulles, Virginia, where the flight controllers there, under the direction of Mission Director Ken Peake, will be taking over control of the mission of Cygnus to the International Space Station at the time of spacecraft separation from the upper stage or the second stage of the Antares rocket, 9 minutes, 6 seconds after launch. Here in the flight control room at the International Space Station flight control room at Mission Control here in Houston, the flight controllers are taking a quick break before they're back on console for the terminal countdown of today's operations. We'll be moving into a planned built-in 10-minute hold at the T-minus 10-minute mark into the countdown about 6.5 minutes from now. Joining me on console, as she was yesterday with my colleague Brandy Dean, is Amanda Davis.
I wasn't watching this yesterday. I couldn't, I was not at home.
Amanda, good morning and welcome back with us.
Good morning. How are you today?
We're good. Everything is on track. Yesterday, just to recap, the countdown was as smooth as silk. Everything went by the book until the final minute or so, when an aeroplane wandered into the launch zone, if you will, right off the coast of Virginia, and a scrub of the launch was called. So from that point on, fill us in on what the launch control team down in Wallops had to do to safe the vehicle and prepare for today's second launch attempt.
Okay, well, the first thing we have to do is safe the vehicle, which means that the last steps that we do is to fully arm the vehicle and get ready for those one-time events that happen during launch. The next thing that happens is that we have to defuel. So all that liquid oxygen and kerosene that we've loaded into the first stage, we have to detank that. It's just more safe and stable on the pad than it is in the vehicle.
I guess
once
you can
we've
see it's a
done
bit
that,
jumpy,
we'll
but
make sure that the internal power that was applied,
I'll deal with that once we get closer to the launch.
During flight, we go to external power and then make sure those batteries are nice and topped off for today.
Very good. And as you can see, today's launch is scheduled about 40 minutes after sunrise down at Wallops Island. Everything continues to go very, very smoothly. No issues reported. In a weather briefing that took place about an hour and a half ago, the launch control team down in Wallops was told that unlike yesterday, which was a pristine day in terms of visibility, there are some cirrus clouds that have drifted in towards the launch site from the south. However, right now, we're 95% go for launch in terms of weather conditions, only a 5% chance of weather violations, but the most recent weather report indicates that everything is green and that the range is green at the moment for the final minutes of this countdown. Just to take you through the final minutes of the countdown again, we'll be moving about 4.5 minutes from now into a planned built-in 10-minute hold at the T-minus 10-minute mark at about 6:55 a.m. Eastern Time. During that 10-minute hold, there will be a final poll for readiness to proceed with the final countdown. Flight Director Emily Nelson here in the Mission Control Center in Houston at the Johnson Space Center already has polled her her team of flight controllers and the International Space Station is go for launch. The countdown will resume at the T-minus 10-minute mark at 7:04 and 52 seconds a.m. Eastern Time. About 3.5 minutes before launch, there will be an automatic command to initiate the auto sequence start for the terminal portion of the countdown, and liftoff is scheduled at 7:14 and 52 seconds a.m. Eastern Time at the start of a 5-minute window that is available for Antares to get off the pad today. Again, 9 minutes and 6-second journey for the Cygnus spacecraft to reach its preliminary orbit. Assuming a launch today and a successful insertion into orbit and the deployment of Cygnus's solar arrays, which will be initiated about an hour and a half after launch, everything will be on track for the arrival of Cygnus at the International Space Station on Tuesday morning in the wee hours, where Expedition 53 flight engineer Paolo Nespoli of the European Space Agency and station commander Randy Bresnik will be in the cupola of the station at the ready, operating the station's Canadarm2 robotic arm to reach out and capture Cygnus for its ground-controlled installation on the Earth-facing port of the Unity module of the International Space Station. Cygnus is scheduled to remain at the station and actually installed at Unity until December 3rd, when it will be unberthed again by ground controllers here at Mission Control in Houston. It will be maneuvered to the top side, or the space-facing side, of the Harmony module of the International Space Station for about 12 hours of data collection, GPS data and other navigational information that will be applicable to the future arrival of commercial crew vehicles that will be docking at international docking adapters at the Harmony module, or Node 2, if you will, of the International Space Station. The actual release of Cygnus from the robotic arm would be scheduled the following day on December 4th. And again, here with Amanda Davis, the Orbital ATK Director of Program Management. Amanda, so in that 9-minute period or so between liftoff and orbital insertion of Cygnus, if you could fill us in on some of the milestones we'll be listening to on the countdown loop from all of the launch controllers in Wallops, that would be interesting.
Okay, so the first thing, we have first stage burn that takes about 3.5 minutes. And then next we go into a coast phase. During that coast phase, we deploy the fairing that's been protecting Cygnus on its way up, and then the inner stage is also deployed. From there, we ignite stage 2, and that burns about 2.5 minutes. And then we have another coast period, and that's to equal out any rates, so we make sure that Cygnus is nice and steady before we deploy it. And that's the end of the Antares mission. And as you mentioned earlier, about an hour and a half later, we'll deploy the solar arrays.
And Mark.
Okay guys, we're less than 10 seconds away from launch.
5,
Pause the video until now.
3, 2, 1.
And ignition.
And we have ignition.
And the liftoff of the Antares. I was worried the launch may not occur because there were boats in the air. Whoa, that's a vicious exhaust.
Liftoff confirmed.
Strange
Antares and the
thing.
SS Gene Cernan now bound for the International Space Station.
Clouds. Arcing out to the southeast, approaching the 1-minute mark into flight.
We've throttled back up to full power, 100% operation.
Don't fear yet, the vehicle is not in orbit.
Main
They're
engine
going to jinx
parameters
it.
look good at this point.
Core pressures are nominal.
Core pressures remain nominal. Attitude looks nominal. Very modest steering through max Q.
And Terry's now passing through the area of maximum dynamic pressure on the vehicle. Everything looking great.
Okay.
Core pressures are nominal.
Core pressures look good. T plus 2 minutes.
There's
TVC and
that.
attitude remain nominal at this point. Very little TVC steering.
Means you will be following the path at the window close.
This animation generated by real-time telemetry from orbital ATK, 2 minutes, 20 seconds into the flight.
GNC attitude is nominal.
Core pressures are nominal.
Core pressures are nominal. Roughly,
Everything is
1
nominal.
minute for main engine
Everything
cutoff.
is setting nominal.
T plus 230.
Wait a second.
Power systems still look good. Engine's still at full power.
Just have to close the door again. I don't know if they're saying anything because
We've started the slow throttle ramp to
Earphones.
maintain
Right.
axial acceleration limits.
Approaching the 3-minute mark into the flight, about 30 seconds of powered flight on the first stage
give me a
remaining.
second.
And we have MECO,
Okay.
main engine cutoff on stage 1. PSS is disabled.
So main engine cutoff has
We
occurred.
have stage 1 separate.
Stage 1 separation coming with Antares at an altitude of 67 miles, velocity of almost 9,000 miles an hour.
Okay, there we go.
Getting some
Finish that
telemetry
start off. I'm
dropout.
sorry about the video quality. That should bring itself back up soon.
About 10 seconds away from fairing separation.
And then they're going to dish the interstage, and then the caster, I think it's caster 120, will ignite. Yep, you can see the fairings. Yeah, you can see the video quality improve there, and the interstage just being chopped out. And the caster has ignited.
Coming up on the 5-minute mark into the flight, everything continues to proceed normally. As you can see, the upper stage of the Cygnus of the Antares rocket has ignited. Stage 2 burnout and orbital insertion, the initial orbital insertion scheduled at the 7 minutes 6 second mark into the flight. 2 minutes later, Cygnus will separate from the upper stage. 5 minutes 20 seconds into the flight. Everything looking right down the pike as Antares is delivering the Cygnus resupply craft and 7,400 pounds of supplies and science experiments, beginning a 2-day journey to the International Space Station. Liftoff occurring at the end of the 5-minute window today at 7:19 and 51 seconds a.m. Eastern Time. Everything, all the parameters and the attitude of the upper stage, all in line, everything looking great at the 6-minute mark. About 60 seconds to go in the operation of the second stage of the Antares rocket. Good stage 2 attitude reported from the Range Control Center at Wallops. The upper stage roll control system performing as advertised at the 6-minute 45 second mark into the flight. About 10 seconds until stage 2 burnout.
Burnout.
And the upper stage now has completed its job for the day. Cygnus now at an altitude of 121 miles, moving almost 17,000 miles an hour in its preliminary orbit. Spacecraft separation is scheduled about a minute and a half from now. Eight minutes into the flight, everything looking great. We're in a coast phase right now. Spacecraft separation is scheduled less than a minute from now. Eight minutes, 30 seconds into the flight. A true course so far for the Cygnus resupply craft. Orbital ATK delivering a perfect launch so far. Liftoff time once again came at the end of the 5-minute window at 7:19 and 51 seconds a.m. Eastern Time. We're standing by for spacecraft separation.
And separation of the Cygnus by the looks of it.
Spacecraft separation now confirmed. The Antares upper stage is in a collision avoidance maneuver to make sure that it is well away from Cygnus. Cygnus now, the SS Gene Cernan, in its preliminary orbit, beginning a 2-day trek to the International Space Station after a flawless launch from Pad 0A at the Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport at Wallops Island, Virginia.
So yeah, that was a Cygnus OA whatever launch on bottom 25. Good.